Hello everyone. I wanted to go ahead and show you guys today how to set up this iCode 4-port adapter. And the 2-port adapter is similar, but there's variations of this. There's 2-port ones, 4-port ones, some with screen and buttons, some without anything. So I'll show you this one, but the configuration is very similar with the rest of them. And today's session, we're going to show how to configure this with RetroPie, because that seems to be a very common question I'm getting on how to configure this with RetroPie and RetroArch and Stella emulator and MAMI emulator. So let's get to it. As you all know, this adapter has a micro USB port, and it comes with a cable in the box that on one end you connect the micro USB. When you connect this, make sure you be very gentle and insert it very softly like that till you see the light and it's on. I've put this caution label here, and my recommendation is just do not disconnect this. Just leave this connected, and always just disconnect the other end. You know, the standard USB where you connect it to your RetroPie or PC or whatever. But keep this on, because that way you don't damage the USB port on the device itself. Okay, so when you turn it on, this particular model, the 4-port ones, the port 1 is on the left side. I know I've gotten some requests that for me to flip these around, and maybe in the future I'll do that, but for now just know port 1 is labeled as, you know, port 1 up here, you can see it, port 2, 3, and 4. So I'm going to go ahead and connect the joystick here, and here's my joystick, so that's what's connected. And as I move around, notice that you know, I get responses on this end. Now, you know, there's obviously, you know, 4 ports, so you'll see 4 different displays that will light up here, depending on each of the joysticks that you have connected to the device. And I'll show you guys paddle in a second. Okay, but the main point is that once you connect it, then you need to work on your RetroPie. You shouldn't need any drivers for RetroPie, but here's my RetroPie setup. I've got a screen, a small keyboard, and that's my RetroPie device right there that I've got a case around it, and I've connected the USB port. Okay, so I'm going to try to see if I can get this screen going here. All right, so now that we've got the screen set up here, so in RetroPie, first thing we want to do is test the joysticks to make sure the ports are recognized by RetroPie. And the way to do that is just start a terminal session. I'm going to click on the terminal session here, and I'm going to make this screen a little bit bigger, because or wider, that is, because when you test the joysticks, because of the buttons and all the access, you want the screen to be a little bit bigger so you can see all the information that's going on. Then what you want to do is type in this text, which is cd space /dev/input /, and that'll put you into the input folder. And then you want to do ls to see the directory, basically. And notice that because I've got this plugged in, I have this JS0, JS1, JS2, JS3. These are the 4 ports that got recognized by the device. If I disconnect, I'm going to go ahead and disconnect the device. I just you know, disconnected it here, and I'm going to do ls again, and notice the JS0 through JS3 disappeared. So that's because my device is not connected. So you may have other gamepads connected. So for you, it might be JS 3, 4, 5, 6, for example, when you connect this device. So it's important to first check before you connect the device to see if you have anything. And then I'm going to go ahead and connect it once more. And then now that it's connected, give it maybe 5-6 seconds. It should get recognized. And then type ls again. And you see that it recognized my joysticks. So at least I know it's recognized. The next step is to actually test the joystick real quick. So what you want to do is type in JS test, followed by a space, and then followed by which port you want to test. So JS0 is the first port on the device, JS1 is the second port, and so on. So I'm going to test the first port because that's where I have the cable connected right now. Press JS test, JS0, and then I'm going to hit enter. Notice that it shows you all the positions, and as part of the positions, right now it shows negative 32,000 for my axis, 0, 32,000 negative for y-axis, buttons are all off, and so on. So as soon as I move the joystick one time, notice that it kind of reset to 0. So now it knows it's 0. If I move this joystick up, notice the y-axis, which is number 1 here, will move to be negative. If I push down on the joystick, it becomes positive. If I go left, it's the other axis. Axis 0 becomes negative. If I go to the right, the axis 0 becomes positive. So these moving, left, up, right, down, those will get affected. And then notice if I press the button, that's button 0. As far as the Linux is concerned, or RetroPie is concerned, it sees button 0 as this button. Okay. Now, my joystick, I use a Flashback 9 joystick. It has some additional buttons here. But this is not that important. If you don't have them, that's fine. But as I notice, if I press this button, it's button 1, button 2, button 3, button 4. So those act that way. But one of the benefits of having these buttons on the device is they also correspond to these buttons. So if I press this button here on the top left, notice that's button 3, 4, 5, 6, or 7 actually, sorry. So it's 3, 4, 5, 7. I guess I'm skipping 6. And that's because on some of the other devices, not RetroPie, but for example, if you use C64 Mini or Maxi, button 7 happens to map to certain functions, so it was important to have more than, so it was an 8-button joystick here, but we're only utilizing obviously 6 of the buttons here. And then button 1 and 2 are here, so you can see 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and then we skip 6 and go to 7. And depending on the firmware you have, this might be different for you. Soon I'm going to be releasing another firmware that lets you actually map these as you wish. In fact, I'm going to be adding something like 16 buttons, and you'll be able to map this to any of the buttons. But for now, this is how it works. So that's your buttons there. So why am I telling you this? Because if you want to manually configure this later on, which I'm going to show you through RetroArch, through the config files, it's important to know what Linux sees which button is what. So write those numbers down on a piece of paper so you know which color is which button. So that way later on when you want to configure it through your config file, you'll know what they are. Most of you probably don't need to do it through config file because it's kind of automated, and I'll show you that. But if you want to have more advanced functions, you'll want to make note of those. Okay, so I'm going to push Control-C to come out. Now, the next step is, I'm going to go ahead and assume everything's okay with the other ports because I know they're working. And I'm going to go ahead and run Emulation Station so you guys can see how we can do the configuration there. Okay. So now that Emulation Station is up and running, okay. So, if I push left and right on the keyboard, obviously it moves, but the more important one is, first just try it. Move left and right and see if it moves. If it doesn't, don't worry. It just means that you haven't mapped your joystick yet, and Emulation Station doesn't know about it. But in my case, since I'd mapped it before, and sometimes it automatically detects it and lets you select. But the most important thing is, go to the menu if you haven't mapped them already. In fact, I'm going to show you how to remap. So, I'm going to go ahead and go to the menu. So here it is. And then, I'm going to go down to configure input, because that's what we want to do, is we want to make sure we're mapping our joysticks that we want. I'm going to go ahead and hit enter. There we go. And I say yes. Okay, so notice it said 4 gamepads detected. Hold button A down. Since Atari joystick only has one button, that's going to be button A, so it doesn't really matter. Just hold down your joystick A button, and it's going to come in here and help you through the configuration. So we don't have any D-pad up and down, so I'm going to just push the down arrow on my keyboard because we're not going to configure those. And then we come to start. Now start, I probably want to use one of these buttons on the device, so I'm going to map start and select to one of these buttons. I'm going to choose start to be the yellow button and select to be the blue button. So I'm going to go ahead and push the yellow button once. Select. I'm going to go ahead and push the blue button. That's button 4. And then now it wants to know button A. Now remember, button A was the joystick button. So I'm going to press the joystick button, which is button 0. And then it wants to know these other buttons. So I'm going to map them to these other 4 buttons here. So button 2, button this, and button 7, right? So I map those as I want, and then I'm going to push down arrow because we do not want them to be here. And then next thing we're going to do is we're going to configure up, down, and left and right. Okay, so that's your right hand side. These are the ones that we're talking about here. So and some people use these as the analogs. Some people like to map the buttons to the D-pad up and down. In fact, either one works. Let's go ahead and use just D-pad. That's probably easier. So D-pad up, I'm going to press up on the joystick. There it goes. So notice it said axis 1 negative, because that's, remember when we saw the joystick test, up and down was axis 1 and left and right was axis 0. Okay, and then down, I'm going to push down on the joystick, then left and right, and those were axis 0, minus and plus. So I've mapped all the buttons on the device. I've mapped button A, which was the joystick button 0, and I am pretty much done with this mapping. So I'm going to have to push down arrow all the way to go to the end and press OK. Okay, and it's going to say, I haven't chosen a hotkey, and it's required for exiting games without a controller. So the select button is the default. If you remember, the select button became kind of my yellow button before. So I'm just going to say yes because I want to use that same button. I don't want to create another key for it. I don't have another one. So I'm just going to say yes. Okay. Oops, I pressed too many buttons twice and I thought I'm configuring. Okay, so that's it. So it was 1, I think. Yep, there it goes. Okay, so now my joystick is working correctly. I'm going to go ahead and start a game, and what you'll find is it's going to be working fine. So I'm going to maybe do Miss Pac-Man. So launching. All right, and notice that it says on the bottom here, it detected all the ports. And now, I'm going to go ahead and press the start button on my device, and we're good to go. So, notice I go up, left, I'm going to go all the way to the end and go down. So my joystick is working correctly. Okay, so that's the joysticks. Now, you might have the button. This game doesn't have buttons, so let's start a different game that has a button. Because if your button doesn't work, it means, Stella, sometimes wants button B to be mapped to the button. Because RetroArch uses button A, that's what we used. But Stella sometimes wants the other way. In fact, depending on which emulator you installed, okay, there's two emulators that come with RetroPie. The default is called LR Stella, and LR Stella does all its mappings through what I just showed you, which is through RetroArch behind the scenes, okay? Whereas Stella emulator, which you can install from the options menu, from RetroPie options menu under the advanced area, you can install Stella and make that your default instead of LR Stella. If you have, the way you know is, with LR Stella, you have to do everything through RetroArch. With Stella, if I push tab on the keyboard, it would come up with a menu. Notice when I press tab, nothing comes up. So I know I'm using LR Stella in this particular case. But let me kind of show you that as well, real quick. I'm going to go ahead and exit out. Okay. All right. So let me pick a game with a button, and then I'll show you how Stella also works instead of LR Stella. All right. Let's try Pitfall because we can jump. Okay. So notice when the game, before it starts, the screen's going to tell you which. Press a button to configure. I want to press the button. Oops, I did a little bit too late. Let's try that again. I'm going to go back. Okay, as soon as I pick Pitfall, first of all, it said press any button to configure, and then it said something about LR Stella. See that? So I pressed the button, it came to this menu. So if you notice, the default emulator, which is an option 1, is LR Stella 2014. That's the default that ships with RetroPie. You can change this if you've got the other Stella installed, and you'll see here I've got both of them installed. So I'm going to go ahead and do this one just so you all see it. And Stella won't use RetroArch for its mapping. Instead, it's going to use Stella's native mapping, and I'm going to show you how to map those. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and start Pitfall with Stella, and I'm going to go ahead and say launch. Okay, so now that I'm here, if I press that tab key, that didn't do anything before. So if I push tab, this is the Stella options menu, and this is where you can map the input devices and so on. So if I go to under input devices, notice that there is the devices here. It shows you where all the information is. Actually, sorry. I'm going to go back here, and notice there's a map button, right? Before I press it, I'm going to go just check what the defaults are. So here's the defaults. So player 0, which is port 1 on the device, up, it's mapped by default to up. But if I say, for example, map, I can push the joystick in the up direction, and notice that it now, in addition to up arrow on the keyboard, it's mapped to my joystick analog port 1, which was up and down, and the negative direction, which is up, was negative, if you remember. Then I go down to joystick down and push map. I want to push down on the joystick, and then I'll do the same thing for left, push map. I'm going to push left on the joystick. Now it's negative there for axis 0, notice that. and then right, push map, go to the right, that's plus, and then fire button, push map, and push the button. And here it is, joystick 0, button 0, as soon as I pressed it. So that's all I need to do is for joystick 0. And once you do this one time, it'll remember it. So you only do this once, and it'll stay. And then obviously you can do the same thing for the other ports. Port 1, and so on. So those are there. Then the other thing that I get commonly questioned on is the paddles. So paddles, what you want to do there is if you notice there's paddle 0, you want to use paddle 0 analog for the first port, and then paddle 1 analog. And then when you push map, you simply move the paddle 0, you move the paddle, it'll recognize it as the axis, one of the axes, and then when you do paddle 0 fire button, you map that, and then paddle 1 analog, and so on. Stella, this particular Stella versus the LR Stella is going to work much better with paddle than the LR Stella. LR Stella, because it uses RetroArch, the paddle's responsiveness is going to be much lower. So if you want to play paddle games, it's much better to use Stella instead of LR Stella. So go through this process. In fact, I'm going to show you real quick. I'm going to go ahead and disconnect this joystick here, and I'm going to go ahead and get my paddles, and I'm going to connect the paddle to the same port, just so you see it. So it's connected, but I have to reset the device for the device to detect the paddles. So if you push these 4 buttons together at the same time, it resets. And notice it showing up as paddles here. And as I move the left and right, the paddles move. And same thing with the second paddle. So they're moving as well. So here they are. See, it's moving left and right, and so forth. So now that I am all set with the paddles, I'm going to go ahead and push paddle 0 map, and I'm going to take my first paddle and I'm going to move it left and right. Notice it picked analog 0 plus minus, which means both directions. And then I'm going to say the fire button, map, and I'm going to push the fire button. There it is, joystick 1 button 0. And then paddle 1 analog, I'm going to push map, and I'm going to move the other paddle. So here it is, joystick 1 analog 1, right? And then paddle 1 fire, map, and I'm going to push the button. Okay, so now my buttons are, and my analog ports are all set up. Press OK. Alright, but since we're in Pitfall, obviously it's not a paddle game. I'm going to put my joystick back in here so we can test it out, and I'll show you maybe Breakout so we can check the paddle as well. Okay, I've got the joystick connected again. I'm going to push reset on the device once so it goes back to joystick mode. Okay, it's all set, and I'm going to push the close button here, or you can push tab again, and we're set to go. Oh, I forgot to map the start and select, but it's okay. I'll just use the keyboard for this particular. Actually, you know what? It's not. Let's do it real quick. I'm going to go ahead and go to input like we did before, and I'm going to look for start and select. So here's select. I'm going to map that to the yellow button on the device, and reset. I'm going to map that to the blue button. Okay, so notice it did these. I'll say OK, close. Okay, so now if I push the yellow button, it's resetting. It is not resetting. What do we got here? Oh, I'd already started the game, that's why. Okay, so I'm moving left and right. My button is working. Great. You guys probably noticed that it was not 19 minutes past. Right? Ooh, wow, be careful. All right. Yes, perfect. Man, I haven't played this in a while here. All right. Okay, so you got the idea there. Let me press reset. Notice as soon as I press reset on the device, it did work. There's no multiple games here, so that's why the select button's not doing anything. But it's all set here. And then I'm going to hit escape and get out. And let's try quickly a paddles game. Here we go, breakout. But before I start it, I'm going to go ahead and connect my paddles again. Okay, paddles connected. I'm going to press reset on the device. Here it goes. Okay, detected my paddles. Good. All set. And I'm going to go ahead and start breakout. Okay, so here we go. That's my paddles working fine. Now, you'll notice, a slight jitter at the bottom. That's normal. I mean, it's not too bad depending on how old your paddles are and how clean your paddles are. You might get different level of jitter, but I'm going to go ahead and start the game. Start and press the button. Yep, there we go. Great. Yeah, so it's pretty nice and smooth and controllable. As I move quickly, it reacts from left and right. Then the second paddle, here it is. I'm going to push the button. Yeah, it's working quite nicely. One of my favorite paddle games here. All right. Yeah, pretty good. I'm going to have to open these paddles up and try to clean them. Sometimes the cleaning process is not very good. I know different people have different things. Some people use WD-40 or something to clean them, but obviously that's good short term. Long term, WD-40 might not be so healthy for the potentiometers. So just do a search on cleaning Atari paddles and it'll tell you. But as you can see, I had pretty smooth control, and I was playing with one hand and trying to hold all this stuff together. So I think that's it for the paddle connection. The last thing I wanted to quickly show you is the configuration file. We did all these mappings. Where all this stuff stored, right? So I'm going to go ahead and leave Emulation Station, and I want to show you quickly in the file system. What you'll notice is, under the root, if you go to the the lib folder. I'm sorry, not lib. What are we talking about? It's the option folder, OPT folder. So under OPT folder, under RetroPie configs, you'll see all the different emulators here. And RetroArch stores all its mapping. If you want a common mapping for all your emulators, you can go into this all folder, and you'll see this RetroArch config. But in our case, we were doing 2600, so that's where we want to focus on, because you probably want to use your joystick with their 2600 games. But either way, yeah, you'll notice that under Atari 2600, I've got two different folders, my Stella emulator and my Stella 2014. But both of them, the config is going to be in the same, in the root folder here under Atari 2600. So here's the config file. And this is where if you wanted to manually oops, if you wanted to manually, I'm going to open this up, the text editor. You'll notice that you have things like this where you can, any setting that you make here in this file is going to override it. So I had put some information in here, but you can see input player 1, the A button is mapped to the Linux buttons 1. The B button is button 0. So that's why when I showed you early on where you did the JS test and you wrote down all the different axes, and notice the up axis and the down axis, the -1 direction, which means axis 1 in a negative direction, axis 1 in a positive direction, then left and right was axis 0 in negative and positive direction, and then these are the select and start buttons and so on. So you typically don't need to do this manually. This is an example on that I have, but yours might be a little bit different, but this is how you would configure them in here. So if you have any questions, don't hesitate. Just send an email to info@icode.com, and I'd be happy to help. I hope this was helpful. If it was, give us a thumbs up. Put in your comments. It'll certainly help everybody else. Bye.